I want to level with you. When I set out to make this series, it was with the express intent of having the knowledge that I know why most people are here. Most people, they're here because, well, they've got to write a paper about a certain poem. They need to know if they understand the actual plot of this short story. They need to know if they understand why this novel is so popular, why they have to read it in their English literature class. I get it. So I set out, I'm going to select 30 poems that are important poems, and instead of doing what I do normally, which is kind of take a blank sheet to a poem and say, what can I make out of it? What's in here, right? That's kind of what I do. I said, let's make a series about these important poems, and what we'll do is we'll kind of give the generally accepted meanings behind the poems, right? That's what people who were in class want. And I'm an idiot, so I started this series off with my favorite poet, the greatest poet, Emily Dickinson. And because Emily Dickinson's so great, Emily Dickinson's my favorite, I read that poem and I looked up, what are the generally accepted talking points for this poem? And I couldn't do it. I couldn't say the boring stuff about an Emily Dickinson poem. And that little nugget of prictitude in there, in me, carried through the second poem in this series and the third. And here we are, circling back on Emily Dickinson. And guys, this is certainly not going to be the generally accepted viewpoint on I Felt a Funeral in my brain. This is the wildest, probably, interpretation that I have ever given for this poem. This poem has appeared on the channel several times. I don't think I've ever gotten here. Man, this is a doozy. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for a poetry discussion which will appear in three separate playlists, on this channel. Number one being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated to the greatest poet of all time. Number two, 30 must-read poems, a playlist of 30 videos on 30 very important poems. And finally, the poetry discussion playlist, which is nearing 700 videos strong at this point. This video will have three separate sections. Number one, a brief biography after this portion of the video over who is Emily Dickinson. Then, what types of poetry is Emily Dickinson known for writing, before we get into the actual analysis and breakdown of this poem. So, who was Emily Dickinson? Emily Elizabeth Dickinson, the reclusive and enigmatic poet, was born December 10th, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts. For reference, this was the same year that the Church of Latter-day Saints was born and King George IV died. Ironically, in contrast with Emily's misanthropic propensities, her family was distinguished in the community. Notably, her father, Edward, was a lawyer and a trustee at Amherst College, a college her grandfather, Samuel, had had a hand in founding. But if her family name and her father loomed large in the community, Edward was inescapable in her life. Of her father, Emily said, "His heart was pure and terrible, and I think no other like it exists." Still, she respected him, even if her literary and intellectual proclivities were pursued in rebellion. If her father ran hot, it seems it was something she could understand, if not admire. Her relationship with her mother was colder. Emily Norcross Dickinson was said to be melancholic, and might today be described as depressive. Of her mother, Emily said, "She was an awful mother, but I liked her better than none." Far from a 5-star review, but we can recognize the signatures of both temperatures in her poetry. At 17 years old, Emily began attending Mary Lyons Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. She would attend the seminary all the way until May of the next year. The reasons for her leaving depend on who is relaying them. Whatever the reasons, like many geniuses, she did not finish her foray into post-secondary education. Shortly thereafter, Dickinson's relationship with Susan Gilbert would blossom and be further solidified in 1853 when Gilbert was engaged to Austin Dickinson, Emily's brother. Susan would then become Susan Gilbert Dickinson in 1856. During this same decade, Emily would embark on an introspective odyssey that would transform American letters and poetry altogether. The years from 1858 to 1865 are referred to as the writing years by Dickinson scholars. During this period, she wrote hundreds of poems, and by the end of this period, she had written over 1,100 of her 1,789 known poems. But she would end this period in her cousin's care after receiving treatment for what is now believed to have been iritis, an inflammation of the muscles in her eyes. If the humanitarian burden of writing 1,000 of the greatest poems to ever exist was not toilsome enough to cause her complete withdrawal, loss would be. Part of her instructions in order that she would keep her eyesight was that she had to stop reading. Emily Dickinson also struggled mightily to deal with death, and losing people who were important to her devastated her more each time it happened. During this period, she had remarked that before she could recover from one loss, she had lost someone else. And with hundreds of the greatest poems to ever be written still inside her mind, Emily Dickinson became the woman in white, dressing completely in white, never leaving her family's property, and even preferring to speak to people through the closed door to her bedroom. Emily Dickinson would publish only 10 poems during her lifetime. All of them were published without attribution. On May 15th, 1886, Emily Dickinson died after more than 2 years of battling what was known as Bright's disease, a type of kidney disease. Her final words were, "I must go in. The fog is rising." Lyric poetry refers to a short poem, often with song-like qualities, that expresses the speaker's personal emotions and feelings. Historically intended to be sung and accompany musical instrumentation, lyric now describes a broad category of non-narrative poetry, including elegies, odes, and sonnets. Romantic poetry is a poetic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries that turned toward nature and the interior world of feeling in opposition to the mannered formalism and disciplined scientific inquiry of the Enlightenment era that preceded it. English poets such as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, and Lord Byron produced work that expressed spontaneous feelings, found parallels to their own emotional lives in the natural world, and celebrated creativity rather than logic. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating, beating till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul, with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll, as all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I, and silence, some strange race, wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. You know, much is made of this poem, or at least much of what is made of this poem is made of questioning what is the metaphor here. Now, I'm a very big proponent of this question. Oftentimes, you set the poem up and then you say, all right, you read the poem, and then you say, all right, as long as we are willing to accept that what a poem is a metaphor, there's a metaphor for something in here, let's find it. If you're willing to grant that, most poems become a lot of fun that way. A lot of that discussion in the realm of this poem, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, circles around, is this a metaphor for going crazy? And that's in there, sure. That ending there where a plank in reason broke and I sunk into insanity, however it is that you want to look at that, sure, that's there. We can read that. That's if you're writing the paper, I suggest you stop there. I suggest that you take your A and you go that route. We're not going to here because there's something I don't know if I've ever noticed in this poem before. And here's where I want to start. I'm going to highlight the sensory phrases in this poem. I will highlight touch, the sense of touch, in blue. I will highlight sight in orange. I will highlight sound in yellow, and I will highlight smell in green. Now, spoilers, there's no smell. Very rare that there is a smell. I don't know why. It's a very sort of a funny thing to think about, why smell is so often neglected in poetry. So let's just go with those for now. So I said blue will be touch. Oh, we got to do the dark one, right? Felt. I felt a funeral in my brain. That is a touch sensation. Then we have down here, where are we? I dropped. Dropped is also touch. You feel the drop. Okay, great. We've got two touches. Now, so also taste. You're not going to have taste in poems, just very rare. So there's none of that in here either. Sound is yellow. We're going to highlight sounds in yellow. Anytime our speaker says they hear something, treading, we will go ahead and count that as a sound. You hear the treading, right? They were all seated. A service like a drum kept beating, beating. That is a sound. Then I heard them lift a box. Now, we don't feel the box being lifted, do we? We hear it. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then we have down here, and being but an ear. This isn't saying I am just an ear. This phrase is saying Being in general is just an ear. Okay, strange phrase, but we'll take it in stride. Now, touch is highlighted in blue, sight is highlighted in orange, sound is highlighted in yellow. Do you see any orange? There's no sight happening here. Sight and autonomy seem to be missing. Sight and autonomy seem to be gone. What is the relationship here? What are we doing with this connection? Now, the question has to be raised then. We heard a couple things that we might supposed to have felt. Perhaps we should have felt. I heard them lift a box. What's a box? The box of the casket. I think a lot of times when this poem is read, the assumption is the speaker here is hearing the funeral because she is the one in the casket. The speaker is hearing the funeral because they cannot see it because they are closed in the casket. But we don't really get that, do we? And then I heard them lift a box. Now, I do think the reading is available to this poem that the speaker is the interred. I think the reading is there for this poem that it is the speaker who has passed. But you got to work a little bit for it. What I want to ask is, we do have this phrase, I felt a funeral in my brain. What if we do go ahead and take our speaker at their word here? I felt a funeral in my brain. This means a couple things. This means, number one, they're not present. Number two, they're not in the funeral, they're hosting it. Your mind is hosting a funeral. That's kind of a weird idea, isn't it? But you've heard the phrase, I killed them in my heart, right? You've had an ex that you have had to kill in your heart so that you do not still have feelings for them. You know that feeling. You know that place. But in your brain, it's different than in your heart. I'd like to read you some Bible verses. Can we take a brief detour? Psalm 119:18. Open my eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of your law. Talking to God, right? Open my eyes that I may behold wondrous things out of your law. If you've ever even made a dalliance past the religious station on the radio, you know the phrase, open my eyes. Open my eyes, open my heart. There's like 5 phrases that are in all of those songs. So let's jump to the new one. John, right? That's in the sequel. 9:39, and by the way, these words would be in red, if you know what that means. For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. So what's going on there? Well, if we're talking about metaphors, and whether or not you believe that what happened in the Bible happened in real life or not, the actions taken in the Bible can be read metaphorically. There is a deeper meaning to those things, even if they were literal. One of the things that Jesus was kind of known for was giving people sight back. So, that's interesting. Jesus, God, known for vision, known for sight. Our speaker here is blind, does not see the things that are going on. There is no sight perception happening in these lines. Well, now we have to ask a question. We have to go back to a question we just asked. Is this our speaker's funeral? It doesn't appear so. This funeral is for someone, and it is hosted in her brain, and she can't see. Where's God in this poem? Now, we just had, I heard a fly buzz when I died, right? We just talked about that poem not too long ago. One of the things that that our speaker states emphatically in that poem is that everyone was present for the moment the king be witnessed in the room. When you die, everyone gets to see God. That's in the Emily Dickinson canon, but it doesn't happen here. So, here is what I want to ask. All the way down here. And then a plank in reason broke. This is often interpreted by people who sort of use the idea that this poem is talking about a descent into madness, that the plank in reason broke, reason gave way. What if it's not saying that exactly? And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and down and hit a world at every plunge and finished knowing. Then what if this funeral in our speaker's brain? What if this is a funeral for God? What if this is a loss of faith? What if this is our speaker saying, hey, I don't know if I can believe anymore. So you often have sort of reason and religion set up as opposites, but I think that there is so you have sort of perceptory reason over here, and here's religion, but religion isn't set up without its own set of reason. There is a reason, a reasoning inherent to each religion. What if, where our speaker is dropping here and hitting a world at every plunge, is into this world of science, this world of perception, all of these things, and was finished knowing all of the religious ideas that they had known before this poem? What if I felt a funeral in my brain is, like Nietzsche said, God is dead. God is dead. What if this poem is not about a descent into madness? What if this poem is not about figuring out exactly what the metaphor is? What if this poem is not about reasoning your way into why the speaker must be the deceased? What if this poem is simply about someone losing their faith? It is believed Emily Dickinson struggled with her faith. There are poems where if you read them, even on the surface level, when you dig down, there's almost no way that's not a devoutly religious person writing that poem. And there's others that you read it and you think there's no way this person was anything but an atheist. There's no way Emily Dickinson was anything but an atheist. And then you go to this poem that was written later and you think, oh, this is, she might be a nun. She might be a nun. And then you go 12 poems later and she's right back on the atheist train. So I think that this is something definitely worth thinking about with this poem. The funeral in your brain. I felt a funeral in my brain. I am not present for that funeral. I do not see in that funeral. But the effects of that funeral still hit me very hard. So this is one of the reasons that I think it's an easy way in to believing that the speaker here is the deceased. The speaker seems to be in denial through much of the poem, trying to figure things out through much of the poem. And then at the end, there is that plank in reason breaking, and I dropped down and down. The way you drop down and down into the earth before your casket is covered. That seems to be, for that interpretation, the moment where realization occurs. Oh, I'm dead, right? What if that's not the case? Emily Dickinson struggled with a lot of things, but was always working her way through them with poetry. What if one of the greatest minds that we've ever known, one of the greatest poets that we've ever known, this poem is an artifact of that calculus on the page. The calculus of whether or not she does believe in an ever after. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube too. Share this video with other literature lovers if you find yourself here by chance but not design. Literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.